Hey there, it's Sam. When we go to Google Drive or Microsoft Word Online or other similar web app and right-click, we see a different context menu rather than the default browser context menu. Let's learn to create our own context menu in this lesson. Just a quick demo before we begin. So I've got a blank web page here, and if I right-click anywhere on a page, I get my own custom context menu. Let's dive into the code right away. We'll begin by creating our context menu element. I'll set my context menu as an article, and we'll give it an ID of context menu. We'll need an unordered list to display the context menu item, and I'll give the list item a class of context menu item. And for this example, we will have for list item. Alright, next, let's style our context menu for a bit. We'll target the context menu. Since the context menu will be moving around, we'll give it a position of absolute, and we'll set the width to 100 pixels and give it a bit of shadow, 3 pixels to the right, 3 to the bottom, and 10 pixels of blurriness, and the color will be gray. Now that's a default margin and padding around the unordered list. Let's remove them and also the bullet. So I'll target ID, context menu, and the direct child UL, and set the margin to 0 and also padding to 0. To remove the bullet, we'll set list style type to none. Now there isn't much room around the list item and it's a little bit ugly. We'll target the class context menu item and set the padding to be 5 pixels and also change the font size to small. Much better. However, when I hover on a list item, it would be great if the individual items are highlighted. We can do that by adding the hover pseudo class on the context menu item. When the item is hovered, we'll change the background color to be light gray. And let's also change the cursor to pointer, so it looks like a button. Okay, now time to do some fun stuff with JavaScript. And as usual, we need to write down our story or plan before we begin coding. So when we right-click anywhere on a document, we should display the context menu at wherever our mouse is. To do that, we need to get a cursor position and set the context menu's left and top CSS property as the cursor position. And if we left-click on anywhere else other than the context menu, we should hide the context menu. Let's define a new CSS class called hide, and we'll set display to none. And we should hide the context menu by default. Now every time we right-click in the DOM, the browser will emit an event called context menu. So we should add an event listener on the Windows object to capture every context menu event happening inside the DOM. And we should call the event prevent default function to stop the default context menu from opening. Now to get a cursor position, we can get it from the event object. The event object contains all the information about the event, including the position where the event was emitted. There are 3 variants to get a position of an event: client, page, and screen. Client is relative to the viewport. Page is relative to the whole rendered page. And screen is relative to our monitor. For the X location of the context menu, we can use the client variant, which we can get from event.clientX. This will be okay as long as our page is not horizontally scrollable. For the Y location, we'll use the page variant, which we'll be getting from event.pagey. The reason why we want to use page is that if our document is longer than the viewport in height, the Y location of the context menu needs to go beyond the viewport height. If we use the client variant, the context menu Y location will be limited by the viewport, which is not good. Next, let's assign the X and Y location to our context menu. Let's create the inline style string. I'll use backticks here instead of the normal quotation mark. The advantage of the backticks is that you can pass in variables and also run JavaScript code inside a string. All you need to do is to wrap them around with a $ and curly braces. I'll show you what I mean. So for the style string, we'll set the left CSS property to context menu X. So context menu X is a variable. I can just simply wrap it around with a $ and curly braces. And right after it, I'll type in pixel as usual. Similarly, for the top CSS property, I'll put in context menu Y, px. Let's test if our style string is working. We'll console log it, and I'll right-click on my page, and the style string is showing in the console. Okay, now we'll apply this style to our context menu. Let's store our context menu element inside a variable. Then we'll call the setAttribute function and apply the style to the context menu. And we also want to show the context menu by removing the hide class. And now right-clicking will show our custom context menu in the browser. Next, when we click on anywhere else other than the context menu, we want to hide the context menu. To do that, we'll add another event listener on the Windows object again. And this time the event type will be click. In here, we want to make sure the element that we click on is not the context menu. We can get the element that emits this event from event.target. Now, to make sure the element that we click is not the context menu, let's create a function for that. The function name will be isElementContextMenu, and it accepts a HTML element as its argument. To check whether the element that the user click on is the context menu, there are only two possibilities. One, the user click on the list item. So to perform this check, we can call the contains function on the element's class list property to check whether it contains the class context menu item. The second possibility is that the user click on the context menu article. So we just need to pass in an OR operator and check the element ID is equal to context menu. Now at this point you may ask why the UL element is not included in the check. The reason is we have set the margin and padding of the UL element to 0. The content of the UL element is basically the list item, so there's no room for the user to click on the UL element. So going back to our event listener, we use the if statement combined with the function that we just created to perform the check. So if the element is not the context menu, then we want to add the hide class to the context menu. Let's test the code. I right click, the context menu appears, and if I left click on anywhere, it disappeared. So far, so good. However, there's still one remaining issue. If I right click on the edge of the page, the context menu will overextend and go beyond the page boundaries. This is no good. Let's fix that. So the idea is we'll calculate the position of the context menu's right and bottom's edge. If the position is beyond the page boundaries, then we'll show the context menu on the other side. Alright, first thing first, we need to find out the viewport height and width. One way to do this is to get it from the document elements client width and client height. You can think of the document element as the root of the HTML document. In other words, the ancestor of the whole page. The next thing we want to find out is the width and height of the context menu. So we just need to get the context menu, client width and client height, right? Well, the height and width turn out to be 0. But why is that? The reason is our context menu is hidden by default because of our height class, which set the display property to none. In order for JavaScript to calculate the width and height of an element, the element must not be hidden in the DOM. As a workaround, we can quickly remove the height class before we calculate the width and height and add it back in after they are calculated. And now we're getting a value for the context menu width. Next, we'll find out the bottom edge and the right edge of the context menu on every right click. The right edge would be the viewport X position of where the user clicked on plus the context menu width. And similarly, for the bottom edge, it is the Y position of the click event plus the height of the context menu. We should invert the context menu on the X direction when the right edge is larger than the viewport width. And similarly for the Y direction when the bottom edge is larger than the viewport height. If we should invert X, we should shift the X location of the context menu to the left. So we just reset context menu X equal to context menu X minus the width of context menu. And the same rule applies to the Y direction. And now let's test the code. When we click on the edge of the DOM, the context menu is no longer overextending. And that's it. Key takeaway for this lesson. When we are dealing with position in JavaScript, client X and Y is relative to the viewport. Page X and Y is relative to the rendered page. Screen X and Y is relative to the monitor. Backticks is another way to correct strings. We can wrap JavaScript code using the $sign curly braces syntax, and it is super useful when we want to reference variables inside a string. That's it for now, and I'll see you again shortly. If you enjoyed the content of this video, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and the bell icon for more content to come. It will really help me out. Thanks for the support.